Today's notes are another set of notes that are referring to some genetics that do not follow Mendel's laws, so some more non-Mendelian genetics. Up first, let's talk about some sex-limited traits. So sex-limited traits are traits that are expressed in only one sex. So some examples of this in humans, because our sexual organs develop from the same embryonic tissue, in males, this tissue turns into testes, and in females, it turns into ovaries. But because there are different sexual organs depending on the sex, an example of a sex-limited trait is that males can have prostate cancer while females get ovarian cancer. Another example of this is something called sexual dimorphism. So for example, here we have a picture of mandarin ducks, and on the left is the male, so you can see the vibrant colors, and on the right we have the female, so some less bright colors. And that's a good example of some sex-limited traits. Up next, we have sex-influenced traits, and this is where the two sexes would express the genes in different ways. So an example in humans would be male pattern baldness or just pattern baldness. So in males, because of the high level of testosterone, this increases the baldness. So males would have higher levels than women, and males might become completely bald. Where females, if they have this same trait, might only show some thinning of their hair. Another example is a singing voice. So a specific combination of genes makes females sing more soprano and more bass in males. So let's talk about these sex chromosomes. So in a female is going to have XX. So whenever the gamete eggs are made, there's only an X to be donated. But because a male is XY, whenever the sperm are made, there's either an X or a Y chromosome. So if you take a look at a Punnett square, here we have the female XX and the male XY. So it can be said that the father is what's determining the sex of the child, because all offspring are going to have one X chromosome, and it's up to whatever the sperm donates in order to determine whether it is going to be a male or a female child. So in addition to the sex-limited traits and the sex-influenced trait, we have sex-linked genes. And sex-linked genes are always found on the X chromosome. So in your practice problems or in an example where it refers to a sex-linked trait, you know this is going to be on the X chromosome. So over here we have a picture of an unaffected father, so a father that has an XY, and a mother that has an XX. But on one of her X chromosomes, she has an X-linked recessive allele. So I actually really dislike all the arrows, so I'm going to draw a little Punnett square here for you. So we have the father, that's XY, and we have the mother, that's XX. But let's say that she carries something, and we'll just use the letter C on one of the X chromosomes. So whenever they have children, we can complete this Punnett square. And what we're going to have is we're going to have a son that is unaffected. That would be this one right here. We could make an unaffected daughter. That would be right here. We could make an affected son. That's going to show the recessive trait. And we also have a daughter who is a carrier, but because she has that unaffected X chromosome, she's not going to display that trait because we said here that it is recessive. So when do When did scientists make these discoveries? Well, Thomas Hunt Morgan was a scientist who studied fruit flies. And fruit flies have genetics that are a lot simpler than humans. So whenever he was looking at the fruit flies, he noticed that white eyes were rare and they mostly showed up in males. So why was it more common for a male to have a white eye than a female? Well, the fruit fly eye color gene is actually found on the X chromosome, so we could call this an X-linked trait. And females, because they have 2 copies of their X chromosome, XX, and males only have 1 copy, was more likely for them to have this trait show up. So if we look over here at the Punnett square analysis, I actually really dislike the letter they chose because they chose W. And the W's kind of look the same, whether they're capital or lowercase. So what this is trying to show here is X with a capital W. So I'm going to change that to a capital R and Y. And then in the white-eyed female, it was X, and then those are little W, so I'm going to use little r's. So then when we're doing the cross here, I'm going to change this. Here's our male. Let's change that to a capital R. And here are females. These were lowercase r's. So we have this white-eyed female, you can see from our picture, and we have a red-eyed male. And red eyes are dominant. So then why did we end up with more common for males to have white eyes? Well, if you see, whenever we do our cross, again, let's change these letters so they make, they're easier to see. We have X, R, X, R. But because we have 1 capital R and 1 lowercase, that's going to be a female with red eyes. And the same thing is true here, right? We have X big R, X little r. Because we have the 1 capital, that again is going to be a female with red eyes. Then when we look at these, this X, remember, has the little r and Y. And because there's only a little r there, that's going to be a male showing the recessive trait of white eyes. And then again here we have X, little r, Y, and again we would have a male with white eyes. And so you can see in this cross, even though we crossed a red-eyed male with a white-eyed female, we end up with females that have all red eyes and males that have all white eyes. So let's do our own example of a Punnett square, and this time let's use big R's and little r's. So it says eye color is a sex-linked trait. So this is going to be our indication that it's on the X chromosome. And it says red eye is dominant to white eyes, and we know that thanks to the scientist Mr. Morgan. So it says cross a heterozygous red-eyed female. So she's female, so she's going to have XX, and she's heterozygous for red eyes. So she's going to have a big R and a little r. With a white-eyed male. So male is going to be XY, and he has white eyes because he has the recessive for eye color, which is little r. Okay, so then whenever we cross it, we're going to end up with X, big R, X, little r, X, little r, X, little r, X, big R, Y, and X, little r, Y. So when we look at these, we can see that we're going to end up with 2 females and 2 males, but they all are a little bit different. So here, we can see that we have this capital R. So here we have a red female. But here we have 2 little r's. So this is going to be a white-eyed female. Here we have an XY, so it's a male, and it has a capital R, so this is going to be a red-eyed male. And here we have an XY, but it's a lowercase this time, so this is a white-eyed male. So we've got a little bit of everything in this cross. In humans, we often have sex-linked disorders. So one of them is red-green color blindness, and another is hemophilia. And hemophilia is a disorder where your blood fails to clot normally. So if you have hemophilia, you have to be careful about getting even the smallest paper cut because you won't stop bleeding. So let's take So in our practice problems, we're going to get some examples of both of those. So the big question here was back whenever the scientists noticed that white eyes were more common in males. Why? So why are sex-linked traits more common in males? So here's an example of hemophilia. So here, a big H is like blood that clots normally. And the little h is going to be hemophilia. Okay, so if we take a look, here's a father. So we have an XY, and he has on his X chromosome a normal blood clot. So that means that he doesn't have hemophilia. He has normal blood. He's unaffected. We're going to cross that with a mother who is a carrier. And remember, because she's big H, little h, she's going to show the dominant trait, which is that the blood is clotting normally. So she might not even know that she's a carrier here. But whenever we cross these two parents, we end up with daughters that are completely unaffected. So their blood's going to clot normally. Now, this daughter is a carrier, but she's going to show up as perfectly normal blood. But then when we take a look at our sons, this first son is going to be unaffected because he has the X with the blood clotting normally gene from his mother. But then here, he inherited that carrier, the recessive sex-linked trait on the X chromosome. And because there's a Y and there's not another X to make him just a carrier, he instead is affected and has hemophilia. So you can see here that all the daughters are unaffected from a carrier mother, but half of the sons are going to have hemophilia. So in which sex are sex-linked traits more common? Males. And that brings us to the end of our notes. So good luck on your practice problem.